All right. Well, I've already welcomed everybody. We're glad that you could join us remotely. We need to do a roll call. Okay, for this over study session.
It's informal, so we don't absolutely have to, but maybe just in abundance of caution, let's go ahead and make sure we got everybody here.
All right. So since Kristen isn't here, oh, there she is. You're in the wrong seat. Well, we just know who's not here. Right.
That's true. You can say, just do it informally too, just
That's
indicating.
All right. So all members of council, with the exception of Randy Mormon, are present tonight. The mayor is joining us remotely, and he's asked myself, David Jones, to conduct the meeting in his remote presence. So, but obviously the mayor is here and fully participating. And now we'll turn it over to our sergeant to walk us through red light camera presentation, and we appreciate the work that went into putting this together for us tonight.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. So this is a red light camera information presented by the Department of Public Safety, ourselves, and Public Works in conjunction. Quick history of red light cameras in the United States were installed in the 90s, approximately 30 years ago. So this is not a new technology by any means. The interesting fact when we started digging into this is the number of U.S. communities using red light cameras actually peaked in 2012 at about 533 communities using this type of technology before continuing to decline to where the last numbers I found were approximately 338 communities using them in 2022. I think this is an interesting perspective because it shows that although this technology is utilized, it has seen a decrease in the last at least decade or so.
It's a fairly significant decrease.
It is. How the red light cameras work, they're really not, when you think about really robust, systems, they're not that complicated. It's basically a radar-based system that's physically installed and mounted on a pole. A light pole. The way that it works is very simple. The cameras are dormant and they are not activated until the red lights actually turn red. The cameras then actually monitor using a radar technology. And if a vehicle actually crosses a threshold that's pre-designed by the city and the engineers, then the camera will actually snap a photograph of the vehicle and the driver at the same time. Once that basically picture is captured, then that information is handed over to, most of the time what I found is a company or a vendor to basically send out a notice of violation in the mail to the registered owner at their registered owner's address listed with the Department of Motor Vehicles and Department of Revenue. From there, what happens is that they will have a basically preset, normally it's about 90 days is the time frame, in order to get that summons essentially mailed out. From then, the violator has the opportunity to either pay the fine or contest it. If the fine is contested, that's where all the back end work starts to happen. And we'll go into that a little bit later. I won't go into it now, but if you are interested in just seeing an example of a notice of violation, you can just go there and there's a good example of what it looks like. It's basically 2 pages long and it has all of your vehicle information, location information. Just looks like a really complicated, very busy ticket with a picture of the driver, vehicle, and the violator. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so to kind of go from the history to how it works and talk about the application of red light cameras, we're going to provide some information, but just from an application perspective, what we have essentially is different crash types. And the types of crashes that we look at from a typology perspective is either severe or non-severe. Severe being fatal or major injury, non-severe being minor injury and property damage only. And when it comes to red light cameras and the fatal type of crashes, typically broadside, which is also known as T-bones, right angles, and approach turns, are the common fatal or injury crash types that are used in relationship to red light cameras. The other kind of common fatal or injury crashes on the roadway network relate to the vulnerable roadway users. That would be pedestrians and cyclists on the roadway network. That's not where we use red light cameras, but that is where numbers and severity are an issue. So from there, essentially the intended use of a red light camera is on high speed and high volume signalized intersections on a roadway system. And essentially that's where we have a pattern of broadside collisions at these high speed, high volume signalized intersections. So in our analysis, we'd look for that. And often red light cameras, they don't necessarily solve crashes in general. They address the severity of crashes. There's a trade-off essentially going from severe to non-severe when it comes to the application of red light cameras. And therefore, it is to address an ongoing issue of traffic deaths at locations where there's red light running occurring.
The screen's not sharing online.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, that's not okay. Yeah, sorry. I'll bring this.
Yes, well, no. It's not sharing on the screen for everyone, so. Sort of, yeah. Sorry. They can see the other things.
Can you see that now, Mayor?
Just make sure your tabs are appropriate.
Okay.
Yeah, but can you see it when she goes into slideshow because it shows it as a different screen? We do it
Yeah,
slideshow.
they haven't been advancing, so I see the one that says application of RLCs right now.
Okay, so when it goes into the share mode
Yeah, no, we're going presentation
or
mode. It doesn't show.
presentation mode, so we just stay out of the presentation mode.
Or just share your entire screen.
That advanced.
He's just seeing that.
So can you go to the little thing on the bottom? Or,
To expand your screen.
well. Yeah, I think we're just gonna have to do it that way.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Okay.
No worries. All right. So yes, we were talking about initially the history and then how the red light cameras work, and now the application of red light cameras. Essentially, what this comes down to is there are two types of there are four types of collisions, and they fall into two categories: severe and non-severe. And essentially, what we were talking about was how, when it comes to specific patterns and high volume and high speed signalized intersections, red light cameras are used to help with a pattern of crashes that relate to T-bone or broadside, as it's also known, type of crashes. So we want to, in our data, look for that kind of pattern to then apply red light cameras as a potential solution. That's great.
I went ahead and compared two programs in the state of Colorado that I thought were sort of equivalent in size and configuration to Arvada. The first being Boulder. I wanted to touch on the city of Boulder because they currently run what I can only describe as a really kind of well-run system, I think, in comparison to the next one that I'll go over. So the way that these programs can be set up can kind of vastly deviate depending on what you guys want done. But the way Boulder has their current red light camera system set up, and theirs incorporates red light cameras and speed radar. So it's a little different. I tried to stick to just red light cameras because that's what I was asked to look for, but some of the numbers are going to just encompass their entire program. Their current program includes one supervisor, 6 full-time employees, and 2 part-time employees. These numbers do not include any court or legal staff to do back-end stuff. So that's just something that that's how they have set theirs up. They currently run 3 photo radar vans. 2 are in use at all times, and they always have 1 in backup. which are staffed at all times with sort of like a sworn employee, similar to like a code enforcement officer. They currently have approximately 12 cameras in various locations of the city. In 2022, they issued 35,000 summonses with approximately a 74% payment rate. They have a current contract with Vera Mobility, and just an average cost per red light camera is about $5,000 per month per camera to lease those. And their photo radar vans cost about $7,500 per month to lease those vans.
Is it per camera or per intersection?
It's per camera,
So do you want all 4 directions?
4 cameras.
Don't they have to have cameras on both sides?
I don't think you have to. I think the way that you want to set it up and design it is kind of open to whatever you guys want. I think the way that Boulder sets up their stuff, they've sort of set up their entire system in kind of a more fair, equitable way. So I think that's probably why you won't see just 2 directional cameras. They try to do a really good job, and that's why they have this full-time staff to support this as well, just kind of in the name of transparency and fairness and things like that. So if they do one intersection, they pretty much like to have the whole intersection covered. The Boulder Municipal Court held 16 trials on camera violations in 2022. And just some net revenue numbers that I was able to collect from the city of Boulder's program supervisor, as well as Vera Mobility, were right here, as you can see. I thought it was important to make sure that we specify this does not include any of the indirect costs of the program. This is just the leasing of the cameras and the equipment. So whatever this all is minus.
Those are the
Can we pull
costs?
that up a little bit? Sorry, my
Yeah.
eyes are not that great.
There you go. So is that was revenue that just doesn't include expenses?
Correct. Well, this is the net revenue after the expenses for the
Okay.
program, just not your staffing and behind the scenes stuff.
Okay, okay.
So 2020 is down for obvious reasons. So they average about 1.5 million a year.
They average 1.5 million, Derek, but that doesn't include the staff.
Yeah, the indirect. Yeah,
All this stuff here is not included in the. So obviously, if what you're looking for is a net, you'd have to figure out exactly what all things to make and
yeah.
benefits and things like that, and take that into consideration.
Yeah, that'll
You know,
come
with benefits.
I wrote that.
Right.
Without, taking too long to go into the next slide, I'll try to.
$90,000. So for the chargers.
We can probably make that work. The other one I compared was Fort Collins. Fort Collins, I'm really not trying to be mean. It's just, I did not get the same feeling, or confidence when trying to even get research about their program. I found myself sitting on hold a lot. I had numerous calls and emails that just weren't returned, and it just didn't feel like the way that I feel like Arvada would do business. But I was able to finally get a hold of some people there, and they run their program with 1 traffic sergeant for program oversight, 0 full-time employees, 4 part-time employees, and they have 1 liaison with Vera Mobility, who lives and works in the area of Fort Collins, but is not a city employee. She was pretty helpful with getting numbers, though. When she finally called me back, it just took about a week for her to get back to me. But that also does not include any of their courts or legal staff. I can tell you, I couldn't get a hold of anybody at the actual number on their website. If you have a question about the red light program or your ticket, call this number. I maybe got 1 court clerk at one time who had no idea what I was asking. It was just pretty inefficient. Their current system includes 8 cameras in various locations, with 4 more anticipated to be added. In 2022, they had 18,000 red light violations and only 13,000 citations issued, with, again, in that 75% payment rate is where the average falls.
And is that largely due because of the Vera Mobility? They're sending the citation out and following up and following up and following up.
So the way it was explained to me, that the biggest variation in non-payment usually comes in the form that after Vera Mobility, or in Boulder's case, their staff members do all this trying to track these people down and serve, certified copies to say you need to come into court. All roads lead to nowhere. They just can't ever determine who violated this. The registered owner isn't actually on file with the Department of Revenue correctly. The registrations aren't updated. And they get to a point where they go, okay, you know what? We're not going to keep chasing this for this. They just eat it.
Kind of like the time I got busted in Denver driving the consular car. They never found me.
Never found you. Correct. Because it's probably not registered. It's not registered. So that's usually where they said that 15 to 20%.
That was like 6 years ago, Ed, don't worry.
That's where that 15 to 20% rate usually comes in, is they just improper registrations and they try to find them to no avail. Okay. Obviously, just another payment rate still within that 75 to 80%. Their contract with Vera Mobility is also with Vera Mobility, but there is a setup very different than Boulder, in that Fort Collins and their city attorneys, of course, process all of their payments, which is a little strange. So I found it a little bit harder to get their actual numbers for their net revenues. I don't know, even when I called the Vera Mobility lady to ask her what the numbers look like, she's like, I don't know, Fort Collins just does their own thing, so we don't know. Their Fort Collins city attorneys processed between 40 and 50 motions to dismiss camera violations per month. So, obviously anybody has any insight into, the motions, you're probably going to have some back end stuff. And they dealt with approximately 15 to 20 trials for camera violations per year. Again, the net revenue for Fort Collins was just unknown because they processed their own payments and they couldn't really explain that to me. And nobody got back to me. So I don't know what they make. I would imagine it's some money or they wouldn't keep doing it, but some of the considerations and costs. We sort of touched on it a little bit. This is pretty standard across the board, but these can vary just a little bit, but this is pretty average. $5,000 for a red light camera, $7,500 per month on the vans. This one, obviously, something to take into consideration is additional court and legal staff to process and adjudicate all these disputed violations. If the city of Arvada decides to go with this, and that's how they set this up. Sworn officers for the red light camera program. Boulder PD offers 7 full-time officers and 2 part-time. Like I was saying, I think it's just a more well-run and efficient model. Fort Collins has 1 full-time police sergeant with 4 part-time and 8 current vacancies. That was a little concerning to me, is they've had these spots. They want 12 part-time people to do this. They have 1. They just got the other 3. I don't even know if they've started yet. And they're trying to get 12 hired. So I haven't.
Is it a new program?
It is not new. No, they have been running this for years. I already talked about, I won't, bore you to death.
And when you say Boulder PD, it's 1 sergeant and 7 FT non-sworn officers, right?
I'm sorry.
FTs.
So Boulder PD is 7 full-time employees with a civilian supervisor for oversight. They really don't do a lot with their sworn officers. Their sworn officers don't have a lot of involvement. It's more of a type of a code enforcement type system where they have individuals who are sort of sworn in, but not at a police officer level, so that they can go out and basically investigate violations out of what they call the level of fairness. They will determine whether or not a violation has occurred and whether they should continue with the citation. And if that's the case, they will actually have those sort of enforcement officers go out and issue those summonses to those people in person.
Do we have that level of employee? Because that sounds a lot different than our code enforcement, and even more different than like your police tech.
I do not think that we have that right now. I think that that's something that essentially would have to be created. I think that almost the closest, that I don't know where their powers in, would be maybe the LAC.
We have on the parking enforcement side a non-police department vendor that provides that service. And as you heard, it's similar to code enforcement, but it's not quite the same. We are trying to change it actually and bring it in-house over time, just because even vendors have their own set of staffing shortages and issues. So
okay. Yeah, I hope that answers.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, I don't believe that we have anybody equivalent to that at this Right. Just a brief slide. I know it looks busy, but it's not that exciting. So I won't bore you to death, but just a couple of potential obstacles that I found interesting is about every 2 years, it looks like there's some type of bill introduced to try to stop red light cameras and just sort of AI in general. These are just some of the bills. I did think it's important to mention that none of these have been, gone through and passed, but it seems like there's this constant fight about every 2 years to try to stop these. Whether it's the complete elimination of the use of any automated vehicle identification systems, which is a fancy name for saying red light cameras, concerning the elimination again for law enforcement traffic issues. This one is currently now under consideration. I think the biggest issues with this one is it would just sort of limit how long a city will have from the standard 90 days to 30 days for in-state violators in order to actually process and issue that citation. So if you think about, the red light violation occurs, you had 90 days before for your vendor, whether it's Vera Mobility or somebody else to actually process that and then get that out. That was 90 days. If this were to pass, you'd have 30 days, which is pretty, that's a pretty drastic change as well. I think it's pretty fast. They would also require jurisdictions to track and report any unpaid violations to the Department of Revenue. I don't think that would be that difficult. However, when I called Fort Collins just to ask that, that's that percentage rate. How many of these are getting paid? And it's like, well, they actually stopped reporting their own numbers in 2021. So they had numbers for me like from 2021, but they're like, since then, our courts haven't really been able to tell us how many, which is like, okay. She's a taxpayer. Just a couple of, I don't think the legal issues as far as these are quite as vast as sort of the legislative issues, but some of the penalties, the fines are not to exceed $75. There's even been talk and stories that have been run on the news about limiting that or putting that to a sliding scale based on, the value of the taxed value of a vehicle to say, to somebody who makes $10 million, they should pay the 75, but maybe somebody who has a net income of 30,000 should pay less. I don't know how you enforce that, but it's something that gets talked about. The signage isn't that hard. I think the requirements are already there. They're already pre-established by law. So it's just a matter of putting up these signs to make sure that the citizens and the people using the roadways know they're there. And obviously some of the limits or limitations on the usage of red light cameras, they are authorized to be used throughout the state. However, they are subject to CDOT implementation guidelines, Appendix A, which I was able to get in here. It's not that exciting of an appendix, but I did want to put it in here. I think the biggest concern, and when you look at Appendix A, which I'll go to, is I don't even know if we'd be able to qualify for any of these types of cameras on our state highways. If you were to basically start at the start, everything just flows downward. And there's a couple of different options here that usually say stop. Red light cameras not permitted. So if you don't meet the criteria for having a safety issue at that particular intersection, you may not get granted permission from CDOT to put these on CDOT property, which is all of our pretty much major arterial roadways where we tend to have a lot of our critical accidents. If you're interested in getting a copy of Appendix A, I'd be happy to give it to you.
Do we know if there are any intersections that would clear those thresholds? But maybe
Ralston,
80th and Wadsworth is where I'm thinking.
72nd Wadsworth.
Yeah.
I don't believe we have any
Wadsworth.
from just a numbers issue.
Yeah, but do they clear
that the city of Arvada has any that would meet the threshold?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have to have a certain pattern as we're just talking about with the crashes and those broadside crashes, pattern of them. That's what we look for. So when we looked at the Dr. Cox data around this, it didn't show how that pattern to be able to, we have crashes, yes, but we don't have the pattern.
Yeah, there's not a consistent spot where it's over time consistently.
And this would be the solution to that problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we have added also 2 slides at the end. Yeah, it help you to understand some of the crash data and details, how this information can be used, whether it qualify an intersection, whether it's an appropriate or not. So we can highlight some of those
So
discussion at the end.
if an intersection doesn't qualify, is it something where you're like, okay, we can waiver that, or is it a hard like flow chart?
Traffic engineers, as you all know, they're not the easiest to work with.
Hey, yeah.
Ours is, but CDOT's is not.
Okay.
They're pretty strict.
Yeah.
They're pretty strict about the rules. The only caveat I'd put with that is there's a very large effort within CDOT and with State Patrol with the record number of fatalities on the highways. It's exceeded all-time record. It's the highest it's ever been in state history. So we surpassed 1981, which was roughly about 755 fatalities. We're at 560. I think there might be a few more that might pass away here soon too. Unfortunately, we did watch that. So I think there would be an openness to at least have the conversation, because it's whatever we're doing today is not working. There's still fatalities. Yeah. So I don't know how CDOT would. They have to address it. I just don't know.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that law. I'll wait till the end of the presentation, but I want to talk about work zone safety. You've heard me talk about it.
One question about these, and I don't mean to derail us, but they capture data. Would they be able to help with any street racing? Because you mentioned the fatalities. I hear them going zoomies on Wadsworth at night. Like you can hear the engines revving.
Well, I think that they would help in a factor. Do I think it's going to stop street racers?
No.
Their behaviors? No, I don't think it's going to change behavior. I think that if we were to have a critical accident at that intersection, it would help in the investigation because we would have access to video surveillance. I would also just say that based on just my experience working with our accident teams, we generally don't have that difficult of a time of reconstructing and recreating the accidents. Is it nice to have a video to show that, yep, this is what we thought happened and per our calculations, yes. But I think our teams do a pretty good job of reconstructing these, whether we have video or not. But yeah, I think they could absolutely help in an investigative perspective, yeah. Some of the current strategies that the police department's using, we obviously try to use a data-driven approach. So we look at numbers, and we've tried to focus our efforts on high crash and high violation locations. We try to apply our patrol and traffic resources to enforce and educate, which means we're writing tickets. We're also giving warnings and things like that. So it's not just about the tickets. Sometimes it's just about the education. Just a couple of quick numbers as far as PD side in 2022, which again, our staffing is still down, but we allocated 559 hours of just traffic enforcement through the city. And so far this year, we've done 187 hours of just officers calling out on specific just traffic enforcement at these types of areas.
That's not the traffic unit, right? I mean, I don't even know if there's a traffic unit anymore.
There is a traffic unit currently, but this is officers and the traffic unit. Yeah, so it's a combination of all patrol officers and traffic division, and just them coding out or calling out that they're just simply doing traffic enforcement. The traffic enforcement tries, however, their goal right now is to try to conduct at least one per month of just traffic related enforcement in each sector based on the statistical data and also citizen complaints that come in. That's been a little bit challenging, obviously, with the traffic division being a little bit depleted, but we hope to get those numbers up as well.
Seen it up in Light Rock.
Yeah, we try to get it as many places as we can.
Yeah, and on the public works side, we have a very similar data-driven approach as well. I just want to go back one slide real quick and point to CDOT. We go. So what you'll see here in the flow chart is, and this is from the CDOT appendix that we're just talking about, it's identifying alternative engineering countermeasures, and are they feasible countermeasures? And there's kind of that process that CDOT has. We take a similar approach on the public works side of things too, when it comes to looking at our data and our approach. So for example, while we have PD focusing on high crash, high location, high violation locations. On the public works side, we also focus on the vulnerable roadway users. And these are typically in neighborhood settings and again, the bicycle and pedestrian type of crashes, especially because they're the ones that are most vulnerable, leading to deaths and severity that we're just talking about. And likewise, on the cost-effective solutions first approach, we take the interval timing and traffic calming approach with how we approach the issue, and then we apply technology when we have a specific problem identified. So it's a solution to a problem, and that's our philosophy around identifying how we're going to approach safety on the road system. So some overlap there and collaboration with PD and public works.
Obviously, we talked about crashes as part of this research. I really wanted to dig deeper into our critical accidents. So our critical accident response team basically is a team that is specially designed to respond to serious bodily injury accidents and fatal accidents. And essentially, here are our numbers from 2018 to 2023. And you can really start to dig in, but I thought it was really important, instead of just looking at the face value of what happened here, to actually go through brief reports on each one. And this is basically what I found here is you've got total crashes. Of the total crashes that are serious enough to activate this particular team, a lot of them aren't even intersection related. So red light cameras probably wouldn't apply. Of the ones that even are intersection related, of note in the reports or on the actual accident completion form, these are the only times that red lights were attributed to even being a factor in our serious crashes. More importantly, I thought that it looked to me like a lot of our crashes, DUI was still the predominant factor, or at least a listed factor. So in short, I think that it's not a bad problem to have, but I think that we don't have a lot of fatal accidents or serious accidents to begin with. It's approximately a little over probably one per month on average, which is pretty good, I think, for a city of our size. And of those, a very small portion of those was actually even red light related. So are these going to fix the problem? I don't think we have that problem that a red light camera would fix. Okay, Mazador.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, you bet,
So
sir.
if I stand over again.
Yeah, I can click for you. Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'd like to give you some high-level technology that might help us to understand. You have seen that at the beginning of the slide that a lot of implementation of red light camera has been reduced over a period of time. And maybe this is one of the opportunity, or the way that technology has been advanced might help us to not to implement those red light camera anymore. So maybe if we can see the advanced detection camera, you'd be able to see how the advanced detection camera can eliminate some of the confusion that drivers get into the red light camera situation, running the red light camera situation.
You can see if you go outside power.
You guys be okay with me just trying to show you guys?
Yeah, just talk it through. Yeah.
So Mayor, we're seeing a video.
You can't see it, Mark?
I cannot.
Just click here.
God, I love technology.
You can go back to the slide. So you can clearly see that some of those advanced detection system, which is a part of our engineering standard today, can eliminate some of the confused drivers that in a dilemma zone, and extend the green time and help them to go through the intersection without, running the red light. So the challenges is that, whenever we are going to implement, the red light camera, it's pretty much an integral part of the signal operation. So how the signal timing has been planned is also an important component. So we're going to run the next video. You'll be able to see that how integral part is that the signal timing and the red light camera could be.
Don't worry, Mayor, it's a lot of B-roll.
I sent him a text and told him we'd send him the link, so. We don't even.
So you can clearly see that, it might be a difference of 1 second, but those 1 second can turn into a claim and goes to the legal, process and needs to, and how integral part of this operation, the signal and the red light camera. So what happened actually that there are some strategies that city has taken already in place that, as I mentioned, that advanced detection system is a part of our engineering standard. And there are multiple projects that we are working on right now. So I'd like to highlight some of these projects that we're working on. 86 Parkway signal connectivity projects that has 8 signal intersection. 80th Avenue, we have 12 signal intersection. And part of that project also funded by HSIP Highway Safety Improvement Program. We have been awarded $1.3 million. That's something will be available sometimes early next year. 64th Avenue, we actually teamed up with Dr. Cog, and we will be able to implement a better signal timing on that corridor and advanced detection system also. In addition to all these 3 projects that initiated by traffic engineering public works, there are 2 bond projects that are going on right now, almost 10 to 12 signalized intersection that we would be able to add those advanced detection system. So with all this improvement, I'm hoping that at least 1/3 of our signal system will have sometimes when all these projects are completed, that will have an advanced detection system to eliminate some of those red light camera issue. There are some additional accident data that we have put together at the end of the slide. We'll be able to highlight you of some of the current status of the red light running situation in the city of Arvada right now. So, this is a successful story. I would like to highlight something with the slide.
You want to expand it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would like to see that last line of this slide.
Oh.
Yeah. So, there are some successful story of, implementing those advanced detection system actually. But I would like to point out something very important at the end. Actually, it's important to note that system did not change driver behavior. It, in a state, altered the infrastructure to keep drivers from having to make dangerous decisions. That something was very important because, we all are different travelers. We all drive differently. How we can accommodate that, that's actually the best part of solving a lot of problems that we normally experience on a regular basis. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Appreciate it. So, there are some additional opportunities I personally has never been implemented, but I think there are some good value on this particular matter. Extended all rate. So what it does actually, one of our neighboring jurisdiction, Lakewood, actually implemented that extended all rate. All it does actually, think about this way in a situation that if you see the car on the right corner, it's just crossed the stop bar and it's in an all rate situation right now. So what the detection system will do, it will recognize the car is driving and, not obeying the red light and got into the middle of the intersection at that time. The signal will not turn green for other approaches. So it will extend that red time so that it will allow that person to go through that intersection and make it safer for everyone. Again, as I said, this is one of the new technology that I've tried to research a lot of document, didn't find anything, but one of our local jurisdiction actually implemented that. I'm still, it's something choose to implement moving forward, something we can coordinate with them. The next one is the rest in red. As we discussed about, controlling the traffic speed is very important. I think this technology also has some promising in our jurisdiction.
Says no.
So you can clearly see, the current technology and the current infrastructure in place can be used in a different way to address different situation and safety issue. So if you go to the next slide, I remember, one of our council meeting, Bob, you asked about the inconsistent speed limit sign throughout the whole city. We did actually a little research on our speed limit sign. We found 1,600 speed limit sign throughout the whole city. And we actually came up with a strategy of addressing those inconsistent speed limit signs throughout the city. However, you can clearly see 1,600 sign. It's going to take some time to change and make an uniformity throughout the whole city. So some of the projects that I discussed at the beginning, like 86 Parkway, 80th Avenue, and 64th. On 80th Avenue, you are right. Actually, there are multiple different types of speed limit signs throughout the corridor. So we are actually collecting data and trying to come up with a consistent speed limit sign, while we are also improving the signal timing. Because as you all know, that actually the speed limit and the signal timing is like an integral part. You cannot just fix one item and the other item going to be fixed. It has to work together. So we put together a work plan right now. I think while we are waiting for some of the work plan to get into process, we are also working other projects to address this issue. Additional opportunities that I would like to, you remember coming to me, maybe the December 12th council meeting talked about the transportation system plan. And, the system plan is going to be a very rigorous, in-depth traffic data analysis, and that's something that's going to be helpful to identify some of the safety gaps that we have citywide. And as I said, I have put together 2 slides to show you that how those in-depth data analysis can help us to understand the underlying safety issue throughout the city, and how some of the ongoing efforts and the infrastructure that we have in place can be useful to address those safety issues as we move forward.
The data slides now before we.
Yeah, I can go there actually. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. So if you look at this way, that this is a city level information. So between 2015 and 2020, the total number of crashes that occurred in the city of Arvada was 6,124. That's a pretty significant number of crashes actually. 412 crashes occurred due to the violation of red signal light, whereas 224 crashes occurred when drivers failed to yield the right of way at a stop sign. Think about this way. There's a stop sign, people didn't understand what exactly they need to do. I would like to give you a quick example that when I started my journey at the city of Arvada, Don actually assigned me a task at the first week of my job. I was very nervous, to be honest with you, because I was thinking, if people are not yielding at a stop sign, what I can do, because that's their own choice, because there is a stop sign. So we were looking at that intersection and, just a quick closer look and talking with the citizen. What happened actually, if you look at that stop, Grandview and Field Street. So if you look at that intersection, previously we didn't have that stop bar at that intersection. So this is a two-way stop control intersection. So north-south is a stop, but we didn't have that stop bar. However, we had actually the crossing on the east leg and the west leg. So when I was talking with the citizen told me, Mazadur, I think people are considering those are a stop sign. So the people on north-south, they're traveling, they are not actually yielding because they are thinking the other people will yield. So, that key insight information helped me to keep my job actually moving forward, because I was thinking the first week of my job, I don't know how to change the travel's behavior all of a sudden. But believe me or not, that small stop bar, that small solution, we have never had any accident last 2 years since we implemented.
When you put that stop bar in.
Sorry.
And you said when you put that stop bar in.
Yes, exactly.
I always was confused on why we didn't do that as a practice.
You are absolutely right.
Because I grew up and that was a very clear thing in driver's ed.
Exactly.
40, 50 years ago, they stopped before the stop bar, and I don't know why.
Yeah, that's why we start actually implementing a stop bar at two-way, especially we actually include it as a part of our four-way stop control. But you need to understand how many two-way stop control intersections we have. And it's a lot of work to do to keep up with the speed. So we will be doing that as we move forward. But I would like to let you know that think about, we're talking about violation of red signal light, 412 crashes versus 50% crashes can be addressed with a very simple cost-effective, improvements. If you go to the next slide. So this is actually the highest crash location of our city, which is 58th and Kipling. We just rebuilt the complete intersection and added a new signal actually. You can clearly see that 130 crashes happened. But, if I jump into the violation code, actually, the violation for red signal is only for three actually crashes happened because of the violating the red light. But careless driving, which is the 61 people actually, that because they were not paying attention when they are driving through that intersection. So you can also clearly see sometimes we feel like the red light running drivers is the main. Most of the causes that accident happening, that's when we dive deep into the data, that something doesn't show up that clearly. But I would like to let you know, that's why I was referring to the transportation system plan. This is what we are going to do actually. We're going to dive into details of the data set, and we're going to identify what are the simple improvements that we can do in our city so that we can improve our safety into the next level.
Are they ticketed because of careless driving? They still ran a light. I'm assuming that's what happened, right? If they're just looking at their phone, I mean, are they getting 2 tickets, careless driving and running a red light?
They would generally get one ticket, but it would have both violations. So one ticket would be issued and it would be discerned by the investigating team or officer as to the primary cause, and then any secondary citations or charges would also go on the same citation.
They wouldn't be able to prove that the person that was carelessly driving ran the red light.
So generally speaking, if a red light violation is confirmed, then a red light violation would be the appropriate charge. A
But-
careless driving would just mean that it's kind of like it's almost like the way the state law is written is it's almost like a catch-all. Same with the
Yeah, I was
municipal
gonna say,
code.
isn't it easier to give a careless driving than a red light? Because it's
Not
really
if you
he said,
know
she
that
said.
somebody ran the red light. If someone ran the red light and you have any independent witnesses or evidence to substantiate red light, then red light would be the factor. Yeah, so
So-
red light would be the appropriate charge, but a lot of times they may default to a careless. But again, it's one of those things. It's not so much he said, she said, it's whether or not you could show that a red light violation occurred.
But having a camera at the site would
You would
then
know it.
You would know it.
pull from the careless driving, probably.
Yeah, if you go to the previous slide, actually, I would like to touch one more point. So throughout the whole city, we have red light camera is 412, but that includes all the, signalized intersection, which includes not only the city, also the C.1 intersection. And there are more crashes at the, on our regional highway than our local street, actually.
You know, and some of these statistics, when you get into them, the red light cameras may lessen the severity of the injuries, but you might actually see an increase in those following too closely.
Yeah.
Or what would be careless driving because the person in front of me stops and I don't think they're going to stop and I hit them. So while you may see some serious accidents come down, you may actually see an increase in others as well. But it could very much, especially with photo evidence, give you a clearer picture of what was the actual violation.
But that wouldn't help the officer, right? Because the officer would have no access.
We
To
would
it
get
at-
access.
But would you have access at the time you're actually issuing a ticket to
I
someone?
believe so.
How
It's,
would,
it's going to,
how would you be able to pull video or photos off of?
you'd have
that
to
machine
you'd have to get in touch. And I think
minutes
there's a
of-
process through the company, Vera Mobility, to say, hey, we just had an accident at
So you-
Kipling. We need you to take a look
Recharge
and send
later.
that to us so that an officer, you could send everybody on their way. That would probably be the most time effective way of doing it. But again, now you're going to have an officer who has to go back and review that, which is going to, take some time as well. They're
Right.
going to have to come back, sit down and review anywhere from 1 to 4 cameras.
My experience, thankfully, very, very little of this experience is when you made a mistake driving, you're issued a ticket right then. You're not, we'll go home and we'll investigate this and we'll let you know what we're charging you with later.
Yeah, I mean, usually
Pretty much.
people, so I think there's some confusion too about a peace officer's obligation. So a peace officer's obligation in Colorado is not to determine fault. That's not what we do.
Sure.
It is to investigate an accident and then cite appropriately. So there might be instances where somebody ran a red light, but somebody may have turned left in front of them or impeded. So there may be times where you have one crash, but 4 people get tickets, even as simple as you don't have insurance, you ran a red light, someone else has no seatbelt. Everybody gets a ticket is how it's supposed to work. But yeah, that's generally what that is. But it's the officers are not going out there looking for what fits here. It's not.
Right.
It's not.
I mean, I can see where when it comes to the prosecution side, having, photo evidence or something like that, video evidence, that's a valuable thing. But as far as would it change the mix of charges off of, when you look at that 6,000 crashes and 7% of them occurred due to violating a red light signal, would it change that metric? What's charged? I can't see that.
No,
I think it
because
would seem like it would make any difference.
I think it would.
you might have more red lights go up, but again, the officers may still tack on a careless driving
Right.
charge in addition. So the careless may not change at all.
Right.
It's just if you're dividing up those crashes, yeah, and you're only looking at the primary charge, those charges are going to change. And I agree. I think you'll see some red light violations go up.
See a little bit more.
I would like to add one more, research data shows that, definitely what John was mentioning at the beginning, the, severity of the crashes can be addressed. However, the rear end crashes start increasing actually significantly because of the all on a sudden, they know if I have a red light camera and I'm going to push the brake so hard, and they start having that rear end crashes. So pretty much that information is very consistent for every research has been done. So you're right, actually, it's just going to change the pattern of the crashes in a different way and may not going to be helpful actually. But some advanced detection, technology might help. Signal time definitely can help the situation. Thank you, appreciate it.
I do drive different in Boulder than I do. When I see lights with cameras, I know that
Well, and again,
I'm
that's
more conservative when I come up to a light.
that's really what we're seeing is that it's the driving behavior that we really feel like has to be addressed. I'm going to turn it over to Chief Brady.
I think public perception is no small matter to consider when considering red light cameras. You heard in the video earlier the lady talk about policing for profit. I think people view red light cameras as a city and a PD funding mechanism. I think, as I mentioned, it's demonstrated on that. Within the police department, I'll tell you, all my time here, 29 years, from Chief Sloan, Chief Wick, Chief Strait to me, our belief has always been that traffic enforcement should be about traffic safety, not revenue generation. And so whether or not this is a PD, if we went this way, if it was a PD unit or not, I still think there's a belief that this is a PD funding mechanism. The other aspect is, especially over the last several years, when we talk about anti-bias policing, we talk about procedural justice and the components which I've listed up there, which are treating people with equity, with dignity and respect, giving citizens a voice during encounters, being neutral in decision-making, and conveying trustworthy motives. Really, it's number 2 and number 4 that citizens could perceive differently. I think as John mentioned, you don't want to go back and get a ticket 90 days later for something that you did, or you want to be able to have a say in that stop. And then conveying the trustworthy motives goes towards what people believe about this being a funding mechanism for police officers. So those are some concerns from a public perception standpoint when we look at red light cameras.
Well, and I'll just hold on from the public works perspective, similar concerns. We know we're trying to identify revenue that could be perceived as infrastructure funding.
Hold on, we're not looking for revenue. Let's be clear about that. I think she said perceived.
Yeah.
No,
I
okay.
meant to say.
Okay, you didn't quite say it that way. I just wanted to make sure that it's clear.
Thank you.
This is about safety.
This is just a slide I meant to say about
Okay.
public perception.
Okay.
I think you also heard of some other alternative solutions that we're looking to implement, and certainly we wouldn't want the perception to be that we are ignoring those other solutions. Then similarly, perceptions about customer service through contractor provided services versus in-house staff is another consideration.
I think our strategy from both police and public works, is certainly looking at that public's about the traffic safety. I think our sector strategy has been effective in allowing our commanders to really look at the micro data along with public works and traffic engineering to determine where those accidents are happening. That's why we've really targeted certain areas in our enforcement. As you saw in Derek's presentation earlier, it was really the serious and the fatal accidents were less about red light cameras and more about DUI and impaired driving. I just pulled up a study from HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking area. And I really remember Bob's presentation to the chiefs of police. And I feel like there was a divergence in the lines about 2012. And what I found here is that since recreational marijuana was legalized in 2013, traffic deaths where drivers tested positive for marijuana increased 138%, while all Colorado deaths increased 29%. Additionally, those that tested positive for marijuana more than doubled from 55 and 13 to 131 people killed in 2020. And then traffic deaths involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana increased 11% from 2013 to 20% in 2020. the main point of that is, I think DUI enforcement is going to make our streets safer. So if you weren't aware of this, we have 5 drug recognition experts here in the police department. Because we are seeing more impaired driving that isn't related to alcohol. Certainly there's that, but there's also marijuana and other drugs that we need to test for. We have 2 DUI officers split the end of the week that really go out and do a great job in trying to make our streets safe. And so we're really focusing on our resources to impact the impaired driving.
Yeah, and I'll just mention that in terms of our public works strategy, as Foster pointed out, we're working on the transmission system plan, and this helps especially focus on the arterial speed management, and we work closely with the police department on enforcement and those locations that are high crash locations. We do use technology. I want to also mention that because there is an application of technology in the work that we do. License plate reader cameras, for example, is one of those methods. We use that for parking purposes mainly, as well as enforcement, and to look at when we pick up any data, we do collaborate between the police department and public works to use that information differently between the 2 departments, but use the technology together to target those kinds of needs that we have. And then the traffic signal timing and operations that you just heard about is based on the crash data and what we're trying to do with our speed limits and timing. And then we're also dabbling in artificial intelligence, trying to figure out if we can use AI to help with the video footage that we do collect and help with maybe like school zones and places where we do see violations during 15-minute drop off, 15-minute pickup, those kinds of periods. And work with schools and others to identify how we can improve enforcement and collaboration with like our constituency and the schools. So there is the type of strategy that is public works and police department related that we're working on. And that'd be our recommendation to proceed with that.
So that pretty much concludes, I know, hot topic, right? It's good stuff. Anyway, that concludes the presentation. Open it up to any questions you might have.
So before we do that, let me go to the mayor. Could you click back on the talking box? Sure. Just Mayor, I don't know, we didn't really stop to pause to give you any opportunity to ask questions along the way like we did. So just want to make sure we give you some time.
I appreciate that. I think that there's, I've been in contact with another vendor for this capability in terms of the red light cameras, and I've asked them to get me some additional information that I'll share with the rest of council. Sounds like the one vendor that we've been researching may not be the best, but and I'm certainly, traditionally I've not been a big fan of red light cameras, but one thing I've certainly seen is whenever I'm using Waze, I get notification, red light camera ahead, and boy, it makes me very, very careful. So I think we just have to explore all options, make sure we get the best information, and then move forward. I appreciate the other technologies. I'll certainly watch the links that I wasn't able to see during the presentation and see what other technologies are out there. I defer a lot on this to Mr. Pfeiffer, who's I think our resident expert on this topic.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Oh, Bob, go ahead.
So I think we need to kind of go back to at least my perception of what the desired outcome is. What are we looking to solve for? And I want to be crystal clear. I don't feel like the staff did it where I thought it should go. I'm just being open. There's a perceived, I think the chop camera is a tool in getting compliance and safety, but it's not the tool. So I'm looking for more compliance than anything and trying to make our roads safer. We are not safe for bicyclists. We are not safe for pedestrians. You can sit at a light and see 6 people go through it red. There's no accident, but everyone doesn't give a shit because no one's enforcing it. So it's more of a compliance thing than anything than avoiding crashes. So I think I just feel like we focused on crashes when we should be thinking about compliance.
So can I respond?
Sure.
So when this originally came up, this came up in the vein of, and this was from Councilmember Smith about resource utilization and it was presented as an opportunity to save time because we were down so many officers. So that information was, this will not decrease the demands on our team. So we did cover that piece. As far as your thoughts around enforcement and regulation, Chief Brady and his team gets a very detailed report related to traffic enforcement and what those numbers are and what's happening related to that. And that last report was for 2022.
It was.
And things are actually better in many areas. I'm making sure that's right because I just read it, but things are much better than they used to be. Can we do better? Absolutely. Are we?
Define better.
Numbers are down in areas as far as
we have less police officers enforcing. We have a smaller traffic unit. Because I'll be honest, the numbers you gave up there, 187 hours of traffic enforcement is a little over 4 weeks. But yet, do I have a police officer full-time on a motorcycle?
But we do have motorcycles. So with that number, it means that officers are called out on dedicated traffic enforcement. It doesn't mean that patrol officers who are patrolling the streets aren't doing traffic. It just means that those traffic officers who are calling out specifically for that function.
Because if I have a full-time traffic unit, even one person, you would think that say 70% of that person's time would be traffic enforcement. That's that person's job.
They also
Those hours did not reflect that.
accidents as well. So if a traffic officer is assigned to an accident, which is their primary function, that accident may take 45 minutes. It may take an hour. It may take 2 hours. Then they have to do
That
all
doesn't
the
classify as
entry.
traffic enforcement.
It is not traffic enforcement.
No,
No,
I write a
traffic
ticket.
enforcement is a person in a car on a bike coded out saying, I'm looking for violations at this intersection. So if I was doing traffic enforcement at 80th and Wadsworth, I would say, Derek is doing traffic enforcement, 80th and Wadsworth. Dispatch would say, go, my timer starts. I'm on that until I say, okay, Derek is done with traffic enforcement. But if I were to all of a sudden down the road, an accident comes out, that motorcycle cop has to go. He goes and takes the accident. He might be an hour. I would say fast would be 45 minutes to an hour on an accident. Then you have to do the accident report that is also not traffic enforcement. So an accident report usually generally takes between an hour and 15 minutes to do that. And then all the data that's required that officers put in as well. That is also not traffic enforcement. That's just their.
So to your point, in an ideal world, we'd have 12 officers, 8 on a bike, 4 in a car. We're down to 4. Right. We had 5. Did Nolan get back?
Nolan is back.
Yeah. So we have 5, but we're still short of what we'd like.
So where I'm leading to is, I think there's a larger strategic discussion around this than just red light cameras. Going to what Lisa first started with resources, and I've talked to Chief Brady about it, is how do we leverage police technicians differently? How do we leverage, let's say, unsworn officers to write? But it's a bigger discussion of making our roads safer and more compliance. And I think like traffic investigation, having a motor cop just dedicated to go and write a ticket to maybe a fender bender that is on a side road, when maybe a civilian could have done that through another program like Westminster does or Colorado Springs does, or I can name all the cities that do it now. I just think we need to think comprehensively what we do, because you're not going to get all 30 cops tomorrow or whatever, you're going to 38. You might not even get them for the next 2 or 3 years. But if we can figure out a different way to keep our community still safe while we're working on that, there might be other tools in the shed to do that. And part of the red light, part of the red light discussion is also state law that talks about civilian or that can issue tickets within the vans and school zones, work zones, and so forth. That is allowed. And so I just think we need to think more broadly around limited resources and how do we still keep our traveling public safe.
I don't disagree with you.
And be proactive, not reactive. I hate that we sit here and talk about reactive. We should try to prevent somebody from dying versus wait till there's 15 crashes at the intersection before we do something.
So we don't do that, Bob. And I'm going to take exception to what you're saying. We are strategic. We're evaluating how we take this on. The very conversations that you and I've had and you've had with Chief Brady are being investigated. So we are being strategic. We are looking broadly. tonight's presentation was solely on red light cameras. It was not on all our traffic strategies where we're at. We can bring that presentation back. But in saying you think we need to be strategic implies that we're not. And I would argue that the entire team is spending a lot of time being strategic and considering those strategies of using unsworn to do the sworn work, to do work that can be done.
So let me clarify. For us to be more informed in this conversation, we need to understand those strategies. And if we're not informed about those strategies, then it's hard for us to be informed that this is a strategy we would like to go.
We can do that.
Because if I don't know about all the other 5 things you're doing or 15 things you're doing, then we may all lean this way and just say, put these in.
Where I made the mistake was being responsive to a specific request. So next time I can consider that differently.
Okay. So I mean, just to close on it, and I'll let you have it. I think you were next, but for Lauren, I mean, I agree that the data doesn't show it would prevent crashes, or it might change behavior and it might move the target a little bit. I do encourage the team to always look at as many tools as possible when you're looking at traffic behavior and drivers' behavior. I just because of my day job, I know we're a little behind in Arvada compared to what others are doing. And from a traffic engineering, not necessarily law enforcement. And if there's opportunities for us to leverage those tools, I think you have some good ideas. Yeah. But I also think there's things like stop bars. There's some easy stuff that we could have just done to just make it just a tad safer around that. You know, certain intersections not being lit up with some lights. There's maybe we need to do raised pedestrian crossings, right turns. You know, they're just things. And I know you've done a good job on 57 to try to play with some low hanging fruit. We need to continue finding that because I don't want to just say that it's all up to the police just to enforce. It is a collaborative. I'm glad to hear you guys are working together because it's not just police or the traffic team trying to solve it. So
allow I can add something. Thank you, appreciate it. I think there are some technology also that's something we didn't share over here that, a city of Bellevue, if you go to the city of Bellevue, every intersection has a incident management camera, and there they actually get the data for near misses crashes for every near misses crashes. And those information could be valuable insight that what enforcement what kind of improvements that we need to make at those intersections. But I completely agree with you also that compared to other jurisdictions or CDOT, definitely we're a little bit on the behind on the improvements but I think that's why I was sharing that so many improvement projects that have been undertaken by us, Public Works, and we are working through to improve those areas. Definitely that's a time to catch up. So there are something that we can close.
My point is pretty quick. It's simply that I don't see people running red lights all that often. It's the speeding. Like I never get calls from constituents about this light is constantly being run. I'm constantly getting calls about speeding. So I don't know. I don't really think that running of red lights to the data really is our biggest problem. It's controlling speed and safety, particularly along the state highways, Wadsworth and Sheridan being our biggest two.
Lisa.
Put it on a ballot. No, to both your points of compliance. So you were talking about the reduction in crashes, but I think, Lauren, I consistently see people running red lights, running stop signs, it's not so much that they're always crashing all the time, but when are we going to start seeing that uptick because there's not as much enforcement? I think 187 hours is 30 minutes a day, right? We do the math?
Yeah, last year was less than 2 hours a day.
So there's a half hour day of almost 40 square miles of traffic enforcement because we're down those numbers. So I think that there's some concern in that. And so if we could bring those cameras in, not just for the reduction of fatalities and severe crashes, but to Bob's point, the compliance factor. It's just, we see so many, and we're trying to build a more pedestrian and bike friendly city. But we can't do that when we just see people that are just blatantly breaking the laws at these intersections. So I think there's some value in it, even if it's not showing high numbers. I think that this is a proactive way of creating policy.
John.
A couple things. So I drive around during the day a lot and I don't see people running red lights, virtually ever. Maybe here and there, but I haven't ever witnessed, or I don't witness that as a problem. I also don't see, there's absolutely places where people are going over the speed limit, but I don't view that as a problem. Like to me, I don't observe in my daily routines, places where people are being endangered by speed. There may be, coming down the big hill on Wadsworth, people certainly nobody goes the speed limit there. Everybody goes faster than that. But when I go down that hill with a pack of traffic, I don't feel like I'm in danger or endangering anybody. And my ski shop, while not in Arvada, is at the #1 accident location in the city of Wheat Ridge. And it's a 100% engineering problem, not a enforcement problem. And in that particular case, it's because the ramp and the frontage road lights are very, very close together. And so as drivers are approaching that intersection, they see a green. They don't realize that the one closest to them is red and the one in front of them is green. That's a purely an engineering problem. It's not an enforcement problem. It's not a red light camera problem. It's not any problem. Those are all just anecdotes. My view of on the topic we're here to actually talk about, which is red light cameras, is that I would hate to see us go down that hole. I think the chief accurately brings up what the public perception would be. And there is absolutely nothing we can do to change that perception. Everybody who receives one of those will be going revenue generation 100% of the time. I was, my wheels were that far in front of the line when the camera went off, and I just don't see a positive there. And particularly the data there is crystal clear that at least when it comes to serious accidents, we don't have a problem to solve here with this particular piece of technology. I think if you look at, it's a whole different conversation if you try to just look at the enforcement of red lights, like the number of people pass through a red light, that there's no accident, that desire to have that number be a certain number, that's smaller than it currently is. That's maybe a little bit different conversation. That said, I think the police department is doing a good job with triage of all the issues they have to deal with. And, it's like road maintenance. It's the easy one to set to the side is traffic enforcement when you've got crimes being committed and citizens calling for service about, welfare checks and domestic this, all the different things that the police face in a day. And I think that, if police staffing were to ever return to our budgeted numbers, that amount of traffic enforcement would go up. I don't think there's a lack of wanting to do traffic enforcement. I think it's a portion of resources. And so I don't fault them for that. In fact, I trust them that they're making the best use of time as they can. I think big picture as we go forward, we should always be looking at, are there enhancements, improvements we can make with using a different level of employee to do a task or not do a task. I think that's always fine. I think also, but I believe the team's doing that. I don't think the team's not doing that. I don't think they need direction from us to make that happen. So I would default back to I think that whether it's speed cameras or red light cameras, without an absolute demonstrated problem, that I think it's a terrible way for government to interact with its citizens. I think it's more destructive than constructive. And I'd hate to see us do it. I wouldn't be in favor of doing it.
Okay. Well, just two things. One, the mayor had to drop off. He had a family issue. So I said, I'm sorry. I maybe took the presentation a little bit differently than you did, based on, and I know that it might have been discussed at the retreat, which I missed. But I remember the night that Lisa brought it up in our dinner meeting about from a, again, a resource perspective. To me, it felt like it hit right on exactly what Lisa asked for that night. And one, appreciate the fact that you gave us some pretty solid examples with Boulder and Fort Collins, and how it can be done right versus how it can be done wrong. But similarly to John, I would defer to the chief and his team of experts who do this. And I'm not going to judge them on 30 minutes of traffic enforcement a day based on a number that was reported, because my time that I've spent writing with officers, it felt like we were always doing traffic enforcement, even though we weren't coded out to do that. And so, again, I think we need to rely on the experts who have put forth some recommendations that, from my opinion, again, I think we have to trust that they're doing the work that we've hired them to do. I agree also that there is some broad strategy that would be interesting to have conversation around. Again, I don't think it's our job to get into the weeds of that strategy at that level. We may differ.
Well, this is a policy decision here that would influence the strategy.
Well, this is a policy decision, but as far as, the chief making, a strategy decision with regard to personnel and how those personnel are used, I don't think that's our job to direct the chief on personnel issues and how to use resources that are specifically budgeted for his department.
Let's clarify, if we don't know those strategies, then how do we make an informed decision?
Which I agree with you that there is another discussion probably to have to better understand policing strategies. But that to me wasn't the intent of tonight based upon the original request, which I think has expanded based on what I've learned just going through this tonight, because there was a lot of stuff here that I had no idea about. So again, this is not a workshop. This is a study session for us to do just that and to learn from the experts, from their perspective on, what this looks like. But again, I look at what the recommendations the police department and public works have put out. I think we need to allow them to go down through those strategies. But then, is there an appropriate time to have a deeper dive or discussion on kind of the strategy from the chief's perspective and his team's perspective with regard to how much time is spent doing traffic enforcement or how much time is spent doing whatever.
I think more than anything, it's compliance.
Yeah. And I actually have a question. So, because I think one of the things we're maybe having a cross stream here about is simply how do you define running a red light? For instance, anybody who's got their car halfway across the line when the light turns red, I don't define that as running a red light. I define that as you got stuck in a rock in a hard place and you got out of there as fast as you could.
It would be up to the jurisdiction to make that determination beforehand as to where on that line, if you cross the threshold, it could be a violation or you may have to enter the intersection. It's specific to how you set it up.
Yeah, because I've always believed that you should get like a 1 second grace for all those people who are right there as it turns red, because then slamming on your brakes is far more dangerous than just getting through.
So make yellow light 5 seconds or 6 seconds. Or no,
Yeah.
The reds.
Yeah.
45,
That's what I mean.
1 second at 45 miles an hour is a long way, right,
Yeah,
Mr.
right.
Peruzzi? How
That's
far
what I
is
mean.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it? A car length or something.
I think the interesting thing about that is, and Mazda, you can also confirm this too, the placement of a stop bar to like a crosswalk where there is some distance there. It's roughly about 10 meters, 4 feet. 4 feet. So there's the idea is that we would have safety through the design process with how these are laid out intersections. But in terms of where the enforcement is, that is dependent on the jurisdiction, how strict they want to be with regard to where they draw that line. And it could make a difference, in terms of 1 second, a certain speed, where the vehicle ends up.
Yeah, you have the circumstances where you stop and then maybe you stop on that red and then you start to go because you're making a right turn, but you realize, pedestrian, stop, bam. So there's a lot of different ins and outs. One of the things that we didn't touch on here, but I came across some of those tickets that weren't necessarily issued that we were asking about. I learned through older in Fort Collins, that a lot of them might be, city employees, government employees. I mean, I'm just being honest, it's just what it is, but state vehicles, city-owned
The
vehicles
people who know how to work.
that are
the system.
saying, okay, we got you, but we're, they just kind of, I mean, I hate to say it, but they're just like washing those, but does it open another can of discussion for, our vehicle use policy for city employees to say, hey, if I have an employee who got 3 of these in a year, hey, I'm not firing anybody. I mean, you know what I'm saying? If we get a guy who just gets 3 bad lucks in a year, it's a clear violation of city policy for vehicle use. You got 3 red light violations in a year. Most of us, at least in public safety, would say, hey, that's not okay.
Yeah.
It's another layer to think about. And, I agree. I think there's a lot of different things here. You talk about photo speed radar bands that are only allowed in really residential areas. That's its own one of these altogether.
Yeah, because those are gonna, just for me in my district, those are the calls I get by far and away more. It's the speeding in the residential areas. Lori knows my problem streets very well. I've sent lots of emails about them. And so, but I'm not interested in dinging people who are on their way through.
They don't have a choice.
They're,
They don't get
when
a
they don't
choice.
have a choice, they gotta go. I have no interest in dinging those people. It is the people who that light's been red for 3-4 seconds.
Giving you
and
the middle
they go
finger
through.
as they're going.
Yeah, those are the ones.
This doesn't
And that's
care.
not what I see
This
here.
doesn't care whether you cross the line because it's
Yeah.
I almost made it, or
Yeah,
doing
and-
my best, or I'm the drunk driver going home. It's
And are
red lights.
we,
There's
and
no-
are we, so we're not able to tailor that to give people a second grace to finish going through so they don't slam on their brakes and wind up in the middle.
Not that I'm aware of. I think that could be a discussion with the engineers. It's more of a preset line, and the preset comes from, like Chief was talking about, that interpretation of how come this person might get some wiggle room? Are all the lights having the same
Yeah.
wiggle room? It really opens up this
Gotcha.
this complaint of why isn't my light in West Arvada tailored the same way as 64th and Sheridan? And you start to get into that. So every light pretty much systematically set up the same way is probably the cleanest way to do it, so that it's arguable. And that doesn't even include opening up the arguments in court to say, how are these set up? Because I wouldn't want to go testify how these work. I mean, I don't even like testifying how the laser guns, the lasers work.
What are the primary reasons cited for so many communities stopping doing this? Because that caught my attention. That's like a third that stopped.
I think, from the little bit that I could find as far as why people stop doing it, I think a lot of it is just, it's a very robust system to run. I think there's a lot of working and moving parts in here and a lot of big involvement, from, I hate to say it, but I mean, Chief already said it. I think we all agree that PD is we don't know how we would even implement this. If we were asked to have 8 officers do this or light duty officers do this, we don't even have that staff to do this right now. So I think when you factor all that in to make a well-run system, I think it's just a lot. And I think a lot of people, these cities are saying, oh, let's do this, especially when it started out. Everyone's like, hey, let's do this. This is fun. This is exciting. It's new. And then you realize, oh, wait, to actually run this efficiently, it's a lot more complicated. It's a big commitment, and there's a lot of working, moving parts here. And I think it also has to be, looked at periodically to make sure, is this doing what we thought it would do? And I think a lot of those agencies are saying it didn't do what we wanted it to do, therefore we're not going to continue. If that makes sense. So they might have been looking for 1 or 2 reasons. And if it wasn't hitting those check boxes, then we're not going to continue it because we periodically look at it and it's not doing what we wanted.
Okay.
So feels like we're maybe running around a little bit on questions, but I don't want to, if there's other questions or thoughts or ideas that we want
I have
to.
an idea.
I actually have a question first before then. Rachel, have you looked at if we were to implement either be speed cameras or red light cameras, civil citations, civil violations?
I believe
They are civil.
Yeah.
Civil violations.
They're all civil.
So those have to be, they're not non-point offenses,
On
right?
point,
Just
yeah,
fines.
it's literally just fine.
And they currently have to be served to the person in personal service to the person. It's not You can't just mail that to them. Now you can mail it to them and they can voluntarily pay it. But if they say, serve this to me, they have that ability to do that. So it's not a simple, smooth.
A lot of people will pay them because
Sure.
they're afraid of being served or whatever.
Well,
You have to.
and the notices are threatening.
They're very
Don't pay it
threatening.
right now.
Official.
It's gonna-
My niece
it-
had my
well-
car, she ran some lights and they were very threatening.
And if you don't pay it now, it's going to double by the
And
time
never
you talk
pay
to
it.
you the next time.
Correct.
That kind of stuff. Okay. And does the city have the resources to deal with that? We would have to hire resources to deal with that.
Service of process. I assume so. I mean, that's really probably a question for potentially Chief Brady or Ms. Gillis, but I would assume we would have to add on resources for that.
Well, I wonder, there's probably a percentage of people that pay online versus it being challenged.
Oh, there's some, yeah, sure. There's
You gotta
some
clarify.
voluntarily.
Yeah, it's me.
Yeah.
Sure.
Right. It also, back in the heyday of Denver with their speed things, I had a sister who was a frequent violator and they figured it out. So her husband registered her car and she registered his car. Then they drove their own cars. And every photo they got after that clearly wasn't them in the photo. And so every one of those was clearly thrown out.
With that being said, that's interesting because there's discussion of possible upcoming legislation to combat that.
Yeah,
And
right.
they're just talking about just doing owner.
Right.
Owner
Because you
responsibility.
rented out the car.
You were the owner.
But I'm just giving that as an example that in Denver's heyday, that's the response that citizens will take to something that they see as unfair, unjust.
Everyone's going to avoid that.
That there's a way around it.
So can I ask us or offer a suggestion? Because I feel like we're going with no here. So just an idea. I'm curious if he talked about incident management cameras, which seems like a lower cost item. And I'm curious the cost of implementing a incident management camera versus how much time it would save the staff. It's going back to the core of resources. How much time would it save the courts and the investigators if they had that video footage from the incident management camera at the intersection versus doing a little more of that due diligence background? So perhaps instead of red light enforcement, if we're trying to work on officer capacity, this may help in terms of hours spent on investigations and court time.
Well, I think it's two things. I think not only what she says, but I think helps you figure out your strategies and your signals. And that's why, regardless, I feel we need to know the strategy of what you're trying to do for us to make informed policy decisions. And so if that is a strategy, you would persuade me not to go with this if I knew you were doing an all reds strategy with this approach. Maybe that's not a policy discussion, but that informs me to say no on this. So I think it's very important to know what everyone's strategies are, because I will make policy that probably contradicts your strategies. So I would encourage that we further that conversation with her incident management. Maybe that is a better way, because I think two things: one, your traffic investigation at intersections, but two, your near misses and your other issues, because I do know there's technology in there that you can look at how to improve the intersection based on analytics.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I appreciate that. I'd like to provide a quick overview of the layer by layer strategy that we are trying to work on. If you look at, Councilmember Lauren, I think you mentioned something about the speed management, and you don't worry about if somebody pushed through very quickly, safely. It's okay, maybe if I understand correctly, but if somebody's seeing 5 seconds still going through that red light, that's actually quite a bit of violation. I completely agree with your overall assessment. So, the speeding and the clearance interval, what we call all red and all yellow, it's actually a function of speed actually. So throughout the whole city, if you ask me, have you looked at and implemented appropriate clearance interval based on the speed limit? I have to acknowledge that, no, we have.
Okay, that's where it is, because I've run into lights where the yellow is so quick
Yes.
that the drivers have no choice but to keep going.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying actually. So when I'm not a great driver. So when I see 50 miles per hour and I see yellow, I say I can go through. My two sons just say, Daddy, you're going to be in the car. I say, no, don't worry. I know there are 5 seconds. So I made somebody made that promise. That's not good. It's not good. My wife told my eldest son, 18 years, don't look at how your father's driving. So just to put the context, you're right, actually. So that's a layer number 1 that we are trying to work on and solve it, actually. So that's actually strategy 1. So the strategy 2 is that, okay, how we can bring those information back with our connectivity. So we are bringing those information so that we can monitor pretty much on a regular basis. Definitely, the layer 3 is incident management. That's something can help us to improve the safety to the next level, actually. And maybe after doing all this 1, 2, 3, if we see no, something is still wrong, and there are travelers' behavior is so outdated, maybe at that time you can say, hey, we need to actually force you to get your license plate so that we can actually do something for you. I think that's kind of the way I've been thinking about the strategy. So started my journey 2.5 years back, and somebody told me, can you go and fix all the signal timing? I say, well, I can, but I might get to de-stabilize the situation because we are in a kind of an equilibrium situation. So I don't want to destabilize all of a sudden, and it might create an unnecessary problem. So we are working through that process. Definitely resource has been challenging, but we are able to hire an excellent operation manager. Is going to be on board with us in a few weeks. Definitely be able to see some sunshine moving forward.
Great.
Okay. Anything else?
Incident management.
Well, I think about incident management. If we had that capability today, would we maybe have been able to track a driver that was throwing rocks? That makes a ton of sense in certain applications, but again, at what cost? And how do you, and where do you put them? Do you put them at every intersection? And so that's it may be another topic for another discussion. That again, I could probably get more on board with that. Then
Because I think you can calculate how much time investigators spend if they had camera footage versus that court time spent, that you could formulate a little bit easier.
Travel time impacts.
Hopefully you get a few more plea agreements.
But it's a pretty hefty infrastructure change as well. So you have to look at cost.
Good part's got fiber almost at every intersection.
Right?
Almost.
Yeah. So anyway, but yeah, I think I would be open and interested in that conversation for sure.
I just want to say, look, I'm not poking at your team or anything. I get you're under resources. It's the point of, unfortunately, there are duties that both police and traffic will have to do. They're just duties that are there, and maybe duties are lessened because of work restraints, budgets, those things. So don't take my comments as personal attacks or harshness or anything. We have a constituency that we report back to that expects certain things. Honestly, I haven't seen a motor cop till the first time today, and it always seems to be by light. And I don't know why it's always by line.
Because we had a lot of complaints on speed on light and rock drive.
Yeah, it'd be shoot, fish, and barrel on Highway 72. But don't
stay high with that. Much about state patrol on that one.
You might have some influencers.
Yeah, I do. But I get the restraints, and I'm excited to hear that you got one extra officer back into traffic. It's important, and I'm just passionate about preventing a problem, not reacting to it. It's just something that I've always been passionate about, and before I went to CDOT, and so it's just it's tough right now because of the high fatality rates, and I get every text everyone who dies. There's quite a bit, John. It turns your stomach when you see somebody dying on the highway almost twice a day. Comes across on it, and it deals with speeding or no seatbelts, which is crazy. It's one of the highest no seatbelts. But I feel obligated that we have to have a conversation to try to find a solution or a strategy that moves us forward to make our communities safe for our residents, for our visitors, and for our own employees. Because I don't expect his officers to go and pull somebody over at 52nd and Wadsworth intersection to run a red light. I think that would be like almost, you might as well just run chicken in the middle of the intersection there. But, but there's got to be some sort of solution to try to get compliance, or at least get close to compliance as much as
Full
possible.
autonomous, with everybody traveling at the same.
That would be the best thing. I mean, we're not there yet.
I'm
That's
sure
the
they
best
pull over everybody they see that runs a red light. Wouldn't that
No,
be one of
John,
the bigger things
not
that
true.
police officers would do, unless you're
Oh, sure.
engaged in doing something else? But if you're
Yeah,
behind somebody who runs a red light, wouldn't a police officer? Yeah, that's my experience. I think I've only done that once in my life. But I was pulled over and ticketed immediately.
happened to be lucky that they were at that red light.
Yeah, that they were there.
I'm not saying Arvada, but I can
And I
tell you
just
dozens of
deserve
times
it.
where there's a cop around or by me or whatever, they never pulled anyone over for stuff like that. And it's not just red light. You literally can sit going speed limit 5 over and somebody can go 20 miles per hour past you and not even, the cop won't even pull them over. Now, it could be because they're involved. I'm not saying Arvada. But it could be they're going to another call, they're doing something else. I mean, there's other reasons, but you can't just say they would have pulled you over no matter if you broke the law. That's not the case. It depends on what they're trying to do.
Able, they do. I mean, I don't think
But here's the thing.
police officers are.
Take action.
Yeah,
If they're
think
going
they're-
down Hack Hill and somebody's going 50, to 55.
Yeah.
Candy Crush.
Like you said,
Yeah.
flow of traffic,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
not gonna happen, but they're coming up 80th Avenue, somebody flagrantly broke that light, they're gonna stop.
But here's the thing. I mean, also your officers are going from call to call to call to call to call to call. So there's not a breathing room to opportunity to do that. So I just want us to have this conversation, not to always put the pressure on the police department to say that's all our thing. We should look at technology. We should look at other resources, other people. What are the strategies to solve when we're missing, what you say, 38 officers still? 35 officers? There's got to be other strategies that we can help. And since we have the budgets and stuff, and we should be able to look at things like this, minus we might not go down this path. And that's fine. At least we took a time to look at this, come to consensus and move forward. But we need to look at all policy decisions that help our community remain safe and help him out. I mean, the department who helps us out.
I don't disagree with you.
So
I don't disagree with you that, but I guess I would not agree that that's not going on. I think on a daily and ongoing basis, I think the team is doing that. I think, Mazador has been to how many training seminars and things like that where safety, road safety.
I'm not saying that's not happening.
All of them.
No, I'm not saying it's not happening. But if you think about 5 officers to 125,000 people that live here, plus 70,000 cars that go down Wadsworth, every day or whatever that number is, I can't think that 5 officers that are dedicated to traffic. It's nothing. It's nothing. That's why you don't see them as much as you normally do, because we're in a sea of cars. And if you look at the ratio, it's not fair to put it on them because they don't have enough people or the technology or the infrastructure. There's issues, but if we can help this team advance to the next level, then that's what I want to do.
What I took away from the presentation, I'd love to know this, but my impression of it is that things are not as bad out on the roads as you might imagine. That especially,
And in fact,
Right.
they're quite good.
and that's, I would love to know how we compare to other places around us in the metro area. My suspicion is that we are in far better shape than anybody around.
I think we're doing very, very well.
And how do you define that?
Just the serious accidents, at least for
Pick your
this
metrics.
presentation, when we were asked to look at red light cameras and how they impact accidents and, public safety for accidents.
So the reaction, that's how you're judging our safety, is reaction. I mean, I think if you looked at compliance, that's a different story, which avoids a reaction to an accident.
I mean, I guess
That's
to me, the data that, you use the data that you have, not the data that you wish you had. But in using the data that we have, as I saw those slides, I saw that, serious accidents, we don't have that many. And the vast majority of the ones we have are impairment related. They're DUI, they're marijuana, they're other intoxicants. That's, if you want to move the ball, that's where you move the ball. I don't think you move the ball with red light enforcement or red light cameras, red light enforcement by any means. speeding enforcement by any means,
So you shouldn't,
mischief by any means.
so you shouldn't pull anyone over for any.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying that if you want to apply resources to improve a situation, that the data was pretty clear about where those resources ought to be applied to make people safer. When you look at serious accidents and fatalities, they're impairment related in the vast majority of them. And that, if you want to solve something, that's what you try to solve.
So I just want to summarize what our direction is to make sure that I'm on path. One thing I do want to.
I always love when you do this.
Well, I kind of missed it on this one, so I'm going one more time. But where I wish I would have sent you is a traffic enforcement review from 2022, but because it has much of the information that you're referring to, I was being responsive to one specific thing. So I will send this report in the weekly memo so you can see where it's at. It will speak to some of your strategies and not being reactive, but summarizing where it's at, because their strategies are adjusted when they have this information. It will speak to, you'll see heat maps and everything. So it's great information. I was considering this more of operational and management issues, but there's no reason not to share it. So let me do that. And then looking for another study session, I'm going to go with on overall traffic and enforcement strategies. But what I would like to do is have you look at this report and then provide me what needs some specifics on what you need answered. And then I'll set a workshop or a study session so that we can make sure we're addressing what you're looking for. Does that work?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.